This is the kind of rebuild video that stops every car guy in their tracks. A guy named Jim scored a manual Porsche GT4, one of only 127 in all of North America, for $65,000. And while that sounds like a deal, the condition of the car was nothing short of a disaster. The good news? It only had 22,000 miles on the clock. This time, Jim was attempting a 24-hour rebuild, so there was no time for small talk. He immediately used a forklift to move the car into the workshop, set a countdown timer on his tablet, and the entire team sprang into action. Jim's first target was the driver's side door, which had taken a hit in the crash. The team then used the forklift to position the car on the lift. Once it was in the air, they could remove the shattered wheel. But as soon as the wheel came off, the true extent of the damage was revealed. The strut was completely bent from the impact, and the radiator situation was just as bad. You could see it was leaking badly. The other side, however, was in much better shape, and the wheel came off without any issues. With all the wheels off, Jim moved on to the smashed headlight. With the help of a pry bar, he made short work of it. Time was short and the task was massive, so Jim called in two friends to help. With so many areas of the car needing attention, they divided the work. The shop's employees started removing the underbody panels while Jim focused on stripping off the mangled exterior parts. After pulling the fender, Jim carefully inspected the frame. At first glance, everything looked okay, but that optimism was short-lived. He discovered the strut tower bracket had separated from the chassis, clearly a result of the impact. Luckily, after sanding the area, he saw that the bracket wasn't welded but was attached from the factory with rivets. This made the repair much simpler. They just had to drill out the old rivets, apply new panel bond adhesive, and pop in new rivets to secure it. Just like that, the problem was solved. The rear end repair was handed off to one of his friends. This problem was a bit more complex as the entire corner was crumpled. Using a variety of tools, hammers, dollies, and pullers, they painstakingly worked the crumpled metal back into shape. At the same time, any other areas with minor damage were sanded down and prepped with a skim coat of body filler. When it was done, Jim came over to inspect the work and was extremely satisfied with the result, especially since they were able to save the original quarter panel. Next, they test-fitted the rear bumper. Once they confirmed it lined up perfectly, his friend got back to sanding and final prep. Jim wasn't standing idle either. He began removing the damaged suspension components. He got another piece of good news here. The front subframe had survived the crash without any damage and could be reused. Jim had already sourced a set of used suspension parts. Now he just needed to assemble these individual components so they would be ready for a quick installation later. Meanwhile, his friends ran into a new problem. The main driver's side rocker panel was pushed in. His friend gave Jim two options for the repair. One was to use a stud welder and pull the dent out. The other was to cut the damaged section out completely. Jim chose the second option without hesitation. But first, they had to pull the panel out roughly to its original shape. With the plan set, Jim went back to removing the underbody panels while his friends began cutting out the damaged rocker. Before long, the mangled section was removed. They then used a hammer and dolly to straighten the panel before welding it quickly back into place. Just then, a used headlight assembly arrived. Jim salvaged any usable parts from the original broken headlight, like the main lighting module, and transferred them over. By piecing the two together, he created one complete working headlight. The repaired rocker panel was now sanded smooth, and soon there was almost no trace of the original dent.
Next, Jim laid out the old radiator components to see if anything could be salvaged. At the same time, the new radiator kit he had ordered arrived. Now he just needed to combine the new parts with any usable old ones. The original radiator fans were still in good working order, which was a great way to save some money, so he transferred them directly onto the new radiator. Then he moved on to the AC condenser, mounting it to its frame and then attaching the whole assembly to the radiator. On the other side of the shop, the bodywork was moving into the primer stage. The repaired rocker panel, the taillight area, and the original driver's door were all prepped and sprayed. Time was ticking away. They only had about 15 hours left, and the GT4 still looked like a wreck. After a quick cleanup of the chaotic workshop, the team dove back into the frantic repair. Jim installed the assembled suspension system, paying close attention to ensure all the lines and connections were correct. With that, the suspension repair was officially complete. Just then, another package arrived. It was a new fender, which solved a pressing problem. Jim immediately test-fitted it, along with the radiator assembly and the newly pieced together headlight. With these key components installed, the GT4 had reached a major milestone. It was time for the first startup. He turned the key and the exhaust roared to life with an intense sound. But as he read the engine, the sound was off. It sounded less like a Porsche and more like a screaming Honda. Jim knew something was wrong. It was obviously an issue with the exhaust. Looking underneath, he could see the rear section of the exhaust had been cut. He wasn't sure if the previous owner had done it intentionally for a louder sound, or if it had broken in the crash, but it seemed unlikely a previous owner would do something so sloppy. The exhaust was clearly unusable. Jim ripped it out without a second thought. He then sourced a used performance exhaust system for $4,000. A brand new system like this would have cost around $8,500, so he got it for less than half price. After installing the new exhaust, he had his wife jump in the driver's seat to start it up. After all, he was building this car for her. The moment she turned the key, the sound was a revelation. When she hit the gas, the pipes let out an explosive roar. This was exactly the sound Jim was looking for. Since this GT4 might see some track time, Jim decided to take this opportunity to upgrade the suspension. He quickly sorted out the new components and got them installed. Next was the rear bumper beam. He had found a used one in better condition, so he could toss the original. However, the heat shield on the old one was still good. Never one to waste a part, he removed it, reshaped it, and installed it on the new beam. For the rear bumper itself, he couldn't find a suitable used one, so he had to order a brand new part. He and his friend attached the bumper cover to the lower valance and rear wing, then test-fitted the entire assembly along with the two taillights. At this point, the rear of the GT4 was about 80% complete. They moved on to installing the side skirts. The front bumper was in the same situation as the rear. He had to order a new one. But Jim wasn't about to waste the reusable parts from the original smashed bumper. He salvaged everything he could and transferred it all to the new bumper cover. As they test-fitted the front bumper, the clock showed only 1 hour and 36 minutes remaining. With all the exterior panels finally on the car, the wheels Jim had ordered arrived at the shop. With so little time left, they were mounted immediately. With just 1 hour left on the clock, the GT4 was finally back on the ground. Jim topped off the coolant, reinstalled the last door, and it was time for the first test drive. Even without its final paint job, you couldn't hide the GT4's aggressive presence. That insane exhaust note would make it the center of attention on any road. When they returned to the shop, only 26 minutes remained. It was clear they weren't going to make the 24-hour deadline, but the final work still had to be done. For the paint, Jim chose to stick with the original factory color, Python green. We won't go into the details of the paint process, let's just jump to the finished product. With a fresh, uniform coat of paint, the car's appearance was dramatically transformed. It's hard to believe that just a few dozen hours earlier, it was a total wreck. Jim couldn't wait to get the finished GT4 out on the road. With its stunning looks, this car is guaranteed to be a head-turner. And most importantly, it's a manual, a pure driver's car. What's not to love?